Okay, so today we are going to talk about solving quadratic functions and equations. Specifically, we're only going to be working in standard form. Okay, so as a reminder, when you're being told to solve something as far as any equation, really, the first thing you always told is, you're solving for x, right? You're trying to get x by itself. Well, if I'm solving for x, what my x's are in a quadratic, what I'm actually solving for are my x-intercepts. That's why x-intercepts have several names. Remember, they're also called zeros, and they're also called solutions. So specifically, you need to make sure you're remembering that anytime you're told to solve and you're talking about a quadratic function, you're talking about a linear function, you're being told about other functions that we're going to be working on, you're being asked to find the x-intercepts. So there's several different ways to do this, and we're going to review some factoring that we did back in Unit 1. So standard form is what we're going to be looking at. Okay, so to reminder, when you're doing factoring, right, the first thing you're always supposed to check and see is if there is a GCF. And if there is one, you are supposed to divide it out. Okay, and then the next thing you check for is how many terms, right? Because there's a rule. If you have 2 terms, then you're checking to see if it is a difference of squares, those 2 perfect squares that have been subtracted. If there's 3 terms, then you have to do the sum and the product. And if it's 4 terms, then you just get to put it in the box because you're already set up for your box. All right, so we're going to do some practice and make sure you've got it. The difference between factoring and solving is one extra step that happens at the very, very end, and very, very easy step. All right, so let's practice some. Okay, so yeah, difference between solving by factoring and just factoring. All right, so let's concentrate on the actual function right now. So 2x squared minus 4x minus 6 has a GCF of 2. So I'm going to divide that out of all 3 pieces. So 2, and if I divide 2 out of all of those, I'm going to get x squared. Negative 4 divided by 2 is negative 2. Negative 6 divided by 2 is negative 3. Okay, so remember that when you take a GCF out of something that you factored, it's still part of your answer because your original problem, you still have to be able to get back to that if you were to multiply everything out, right? And if I distributed now, I'd get back to my original. But if I leave off the 2, it's not the same thing. So be really, really careful, please. So what I have now is 2 times x squared minus 2x minus 3. I have 3 terms. So what is my sum? And what is my product? The sum is always your middle. Remember the coefficients. So the sum is negative 2. And your product is always your first times your last coefficient. And my first times my last is 1 times negative 3. So my product is negative 3. What 2 numbers multiply to give me negative 3 and add to give me negative 2? If you have to, list them out. Well, what multiplies to give you negative 3? So it's either going to be 1 times negative 3 or negative 1 times positive 3. Okay, the one that's going to work to get me a sum of negative 2 is this one, the 1 and the negative 3. Remember, you're supposed to rewrite it out with all 4 terms. So plus 1x minus 3x minus 3. And then you're supposed to put those in the box so that we can figure out what multiplied to get you there. All right, so we have x squared, 1x, negative 3x, negative 3. Okay, so again, what multiplied to get you there? You're trying to figure out what your length and your width is. Well, in order to get x squared, we know we have to multiply x times x, right? And it's also what they have in common, x squared and 1x. And then this bottom left square is a negative 3x. So I have to multiply by a negative 3 times x to get that. And then on the top, in order to get 1x, I have to multiply by 1. So my finished factoring, the 2 that I took out as a GCF, x plus 1 and x minus 3. Here's where, I'm pulling the y down because that's where that was already. Here's where we get to the solving part. Remember, x-intercepts are where y equals 0. So I have to make y equals 0, but I have to do it separately. Okay, so I'm going to say that x plus 1 could equal a y of 0, or x minus 3 could be a y of 0. And then I actually have to solve them. So very easy. You're just going to subtract 1 from both sides on the first one. So x is equal to negative 1. And then I'm going to add 3 on both sides for this one. So x is equal to 3. And I'm done. Those are my x-intercepts. And again, if you did not have a graphing calculator to where you could, put this into Desmos and actually type it in and get the x-intercepts for you, this is what you're going to have to be able to do. So you're going to be able to factor it and actually, find out where your y equals 0 to find your x-intercepts. All right, let's try another one. Okay, so negative 3x squared minus 18x minus 24 has a GCF, and you can actually take a negative 3 out so that you don't have that negative in front of the x squared, which is kind of nice. So if I divide all my pieces by negative 3, then I get x squared plus 6x plus 8. Okay, I have 3 pieces, so I need my sum and product. All right, my sum is 6 and my product is 8. So what will multiply to get me 8 and add to give me 6? Has to be 2 and 4. So write it out. Squared plus 2x plus 4x plus 8. Remember, these two numbers are splitting your middle term into 2 pieces so that you can have 4 pieces, which is what we need in order to be able to use our box method. Okay, so fill it in. X squared, 2x, 4x, and 8. 1, 2, 3, 4 pieces. Same thing. Going to start with what something has in common. In this case, let's go with the first row. What does x squared and 2x have in common? Well, if you think about it like distributing, they both have an x. And I would multiply that x times an x and times a 2 to get that top area. And on the bottom, I would multiply 4 times x and 2 to get 4x plus 8. So my answers, negative 3, x plus 2, and x plus 4. So here's where that y of 0 comes in, right? Because we're trying to find x-intercepts, and that's where y equals 0. So either x plus 2 is going to have a y of 0, and then x plus 4 is going to have a y of 0. And we're going to solve. And you should get negative 2 and negative 4. So it's really taking the factoring that we did back in Unit 1 and taking it one step further. Okay, there is another method if something will not factor. If you come up with a sum and a product that is not going to work, like you cannot come up with a pair that will do this, here's what you're going to do. We have another method. Okay, this method is called the quadratic formula. Now, if you take a look, you should see something familiar. We've already actually done part of this formula. We have really already done the negative b divided by 2a. That's how we found our vertex and how we found our axis of symmetry. So we've already done part of this formula. I'm going to walk you through how to type it in. You can use your handheld calculator. You can also use the Desmos scientific calculator. Either one will work, but you're going to have to do this in pieces. Okay, so make sure you're watching so that you can actually work through this. Now, I want to remind you, standard form is ax squared plus bx plus c, right? And a, b, and c are all coefficients. So take a look at this formula. B, A, B, A, C. I'm only using my coefficients. That's all I'm using. I don't have to do anything with the variables. Okay, so I'm going to show you how we do this. So first, you always need to pick out A, B, and C. Okay, so A is 2, first coefficient, B is -5, and C is -3. Okay, so I'm going to write out the whole formula just so you can see how this works. So negative B would be +5. Now there's a reason there is a plus or minus here. Okay, you actually have to do both one at a time because there's normally 2 x-intercepts. And that is a very long square root in that formula. That whole piece right there, that b squared minus 4 times a times c, is all up underneath the square root. So b squared, that's going to be -5 squared minus 4 times 2 times -3. Okay? And you can put parentheses around it, or you can do the multiplication. The squared one, remember, we have to put inside the parentheses. Okay, all over 2 times a. And again, you can use parentheses for that as well. Now, here's how this is going to work. All right, we are going to do not the square root symbol, but everything that's inside of it first. All right, so let's go ahead and go to the Desmos Scientific Calculator so we can work through this. All right, so Desmos Scientific should look like about like this on your iPad. So let's go ahead and type it all in based on what we had. And what we had was -5 squared minus 4 times 2 times -3. All right, so parentheses, -5, close the parentheses, the squared's up here on the left. Okay, and then minus 4 times 2 times -3. Okay, so 4 times 2 times -3. Okay, so that's everything that is inside that square root. All right, so the answer that we got is 49. All right, so let's go back and rewrite that and show what we've got. We have 5 plus or minus, because that's what that means, is you're going to add and subtract one at a time. That whole thing that's up underneath the square root is 49. And this is still 2 times 2. Okay, so lucky for us, 49 is a perfect square, right? What is the square root of 49? It is 7. Okay, so we have 5 plus minus 7. And I'm going to go ahead and simplify the bottom. That's over 4. All right, so let's go ahead and do this. And again, they're not always going to come out like this. A lot of the times you're going to get decimals, which is okay. For this case, we do have a whole number. So we're going to do this one at a time. We are going to do 5 plus 7 divided by 4 for the first part, and then 5 minus 7 divided by 4. That's what that plus minus means. You have to do this twice, once with a plus and once with a minus to get your 2 answers. So the first one, that's 12 over 4. That's just 3. And the bottom one should be -0.5 or -0.5, whichever way you want to write it. So your 2 solutions are x equals 3 and x equals -0.5. Notice I didn't say x-intercepts because that's not what we're doing. We're not writing it as an x-intercept because that would be a totally different thing that we'd have to do. I want solutions. Okay, so in this case, you're just allowed to write x equals those 2 numbers. All right, so let's try another one just to make sure you've got it. All right, so first identify A, B, and C. A is 2, B is -7, C is -15, and we're going to set up the equation first. So -b plus and minus that big square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c, all divided by 2 times a. All right, so same deal. What's up underneath the square root gets done first. All right, so hit enter. Same thing, we're going to do the parentheses. Close the parentheses, squared. Okay, minus 4 times, and that is 2 and -15 times 2 times -15. Okay, and that's 169. So let's rewrite it. Okay, so we now have the square root of 169 over 2 times 2. Let's simplify. The square root of 169 is actually a whole number. And again, once you get that number there, go ahead and hit next, and then take the square root of that number, and it'll tell you whether or not it's a decimal or a whole number, right? And if it's a decimal, we're going to round to one place. So in this case, it's just 13. So what we have is 7 plus or minus 13 all over 4. Remember, that's two answers. So 7 plus 13 divided by 4, and 7 minus 13 divided by 4. Okay, so that's 20 divided by 4, so your answer is 5. And 7 minus 13 is negative 6, and we're going to simplify that. That should be negative 1.5. And again, you can even do that part in the scientific graphing or scientific calculator. I'll show you. You hit the fraction button, and you do 7 minus 13 all over, what was that, over 4? Yes. And if you want the fraction version, take a look at this, this right-hand side. It will go back and forth between the fraction and the decimal for you, which makes it very nice. All right, so one more. Okay, so in this case, A is negative 5, B is 4, and C is negative 8. So setup first, always show your setup. So negative B, and then B squared minus 4 times negative 5 times negative 8. Okay, all over 2 times negative 5. All right, negative 5. All right, so again, what's up underneath the square root is always first. Okay, so hit the enter button. All right, so what we have is 4 squared minus 4 times negative 5 times negative 8. And something's wrong. Let me check my parentheses and see if that makes a difference, because it's not supposed to be. Oh, wait, it is supposed to be a negative. Okay, so now I see what I did. Okay, so yes, that is a negative answer. So let's go ahead and write that out. I'm going to show you what that looks like. All right, so negative 4 square root of negative 144, and I'm going to simplify the bottom just so we can see it as negative 10. Okay. Yeah, 4 squared minus 4 times negative 5 times negative 8. Okay, so you should have done a little bit with square roots in middle school. We did simplify them in here, but we do actually have a rule about negative square roots. It doesn't exist. You cannot multiply a number times itself and get a negative. So this one actually has no x-intercepts. It doesn't actually touch the x-axis at all. So picture that in your mind. If you were to draw a quadratic that did not touch the x-axis, it would have to be somewhere like way up here or way down here, right? And it never touches it. So this is why it's important to do what's inside the square root first, because if you come up with a negative, there is no answer, right? And if you come up with a decimal, you will be able to round it to the nearest place that you need to do. And I will give you an example for that as well, just so you can see what happens when you get the decimal. Okay, so let's go ahead and try one that is going to give you an actual decimal answer. Get back to my Desmos right there. Okay, so again, let's go ahead and set it up. So A is 2, B is negative 5, and C is 1. All right, so again, just to remind you to make sure that you're putting in just the coefficients and that you are actually substituting it in correctly. So negative b would be 5 because we changed the sign. All right, and then negative 5 squared minus 4 times 2 times 1, all divided by 2 times 2. All right, so inside of the square root first. So negative 5 squared minus 4 times 2 times 1. All right, so parentheses, negative 5 squared minus 4 times 2 times 1. And none of those were negative, right? Nope. Okay. So that's 17. All right, so let's rewrite it, show what we've got. And this time you're definitely going to get a decimal. And again, that is okay. All right, so we still need to take the square root. However, it is actually possible, I've seen it written on several things, where they leave the answer as this because they don't want a decimal answer. Now, here's the thing. You can leave it like this if this is the choice that they give you. If not, you're going to need to actually type it into the calculator. So let's take the square root of 17 and see what we get. All right, so we get 4.1. All right, I'm going to round it to one decimal, 4.1. So what we have is 5 plus or minus 4.1 divided by 4. And again, use the calculator. It's fine because you're going to have to do this twice. Plus 4.1 and minus 4.1, one for each. And go ahead and type it in and get your two decimal answers. All right, so hit the fraction button first. 5 plus 4.1 divided by 4. Okay, 2.275. That's not a very long answer. We should go ahead and write that down. So 2.275. All right, now let's try and do the negative. Now, you can hit the little down arrow and get another thing and type in your fraction again, or you can just go back and change your plus to a minus. That way you don't have to type the whole thing in again. So 0.225, and those are my two answers. So again, this works when there are decimals. It works when there are no answers because you'll at least see that you're going to get a negative square root. And it works when there are whole number answers. But again, even with the whole number answers, if you take a look, I would not want to factor and get something like 3 and negative 0.5. And I would not want to factor and get something like 5 and negative 1.5. Okay, those are the decimals and the fractions that we're not going to want to factor to get. So again, this is specifically when you are not allowed to use a graphing calculator. Oh, and if you're not allowed to use a scientific one at all, either, and it's not a perfect square, then more than likely you will be leaving your answers just like this. Because if you do not have a calculator to give you that square root, you cannot be expected to go any further. That's as simplified as it's going to get. But if it is a whole number like these, you should actually be able to do that without a calculator if possible. So we definitely need to make sure we're practicing. All right, that is it for standard form.